already made a video talking about the hidden Easter eggs in Minions and Monsters, but this movie has so many details that we still have a lot more to talk about. Did you notice these hidden things in the new Minions movie, which is already being considered by many people as the best one in the entire franchise? Minions and Monsters is a huge love letter to the history of cinema, and because of that, what we see the most here are references to classic movies and actors who define generations. We see this right from the beginning, when a group of people enters an exhibition focused on cinema, and this is where we see several of these tributes. One of them is the statue of Bruce Lee, the most famous martial artist in all of history, also very well known for his incredible action movies. Another very important actor who appears in statue form is Keanu Reeves, but one cool detail is that this statue represents Neo, the character he played in The Matrix from 1999. This movie was a pop culture milestone, and to this day, it is a major influence for many other works of science fiction, whether movies, games, books, or comic books. Amazing, right? But we are only getting started because these are the new 22 details and Easter eggs you missed in Minions and Monsters. Stay tuned because another Cinewave full of new stuff is starting now. Since the first Minions feature film, we have known that these little yellow creatures were extremely important to many moments in human history, to the point where they can be considered the most important beings in history. But nobody expected them to have been responsible even for creating Lego pieces. In the distant past, the Minions worked for a Cyclops. In an attempt to please him, James, the main minion in this movie, created some pieces that are identical to Lego pieces. Since this happened many centuries in the past, it means James invented Lego pieces long before they were officially released in 1949. And as if that were not already amazing, the Cyclops steps on that Lego piece and feels a lot of pain. Anyone who has ever stepped on a Lego piece knows how much that really hurts. So this joke basically confirms that James was responsible for creating Lego bricks. Minions and Monsters shows how the Minions became important figures in the history of cinema, with them taking part in several movies. The interesting thing is that some of these films the little creatures participated in reference real-life classics. One example is the movie that shows a minion dying tragically and dropping a globe. This is a tribute to Citizen Kane from 1941. It is funny how a lot of people will come into contact with these old movies for the first time through Minions and Monsters. Time to go back to the exhibition that appears at the beginning of the story, because there is another celebrity who shows up there. It is an old man trapped inside a glass box named George Lucas. In case you do not know, he is the director, screenwriter, and producer who created Star Wars, a franchise that began in 1977 and that, since then, has become one of the most famous creations in pop culture, getting new movies to this day. The coolest part is that the real George Lucas took part in Minions and Monsters to voice his animated version. In that same exhibition, there is also a very strange airplane, tied around itself as if it were a rope. Before you think anything, this is not modern art or anything like that. In reality, this is the airplane that appears on the poster for Airplane, a movie being referenced in this exhibition because it is a classic among comedy parodies. The tributes found here are not only related to the film industry or to Lego pieces, because the movie also makes references to books. At one point, the Minions use the spell book of a wizard they once worked for, and in that book, we see drawings of several scary monsters that can be summoned through a ritual. One of these creatures is a giant and very scary octopus. However, when this monster is summoned, it is revealed that he is actually very small and cute. His name is Goomy, but he is a reference to Cthulhu, a monster that appears in the short story The Call of Cthulhu, published in 1928 by writer H.P. Lovecraft. So many amazing Easter eggs, right? If you are also loving these references, comment down below, #monsters. Besides summoning monsters, this book can also make these beings go back to where they came from. But the way this happens is pretty funny. The symbols for this spell are a reference to the computer command Ctrl-Z, used to undo an action on a computer, and which can be used, for example, to delete a text you just wrote. So did that command come from this book? The Minions really are behind everything. The Minions love doing funny things, and you can tell that ever since the first Despicable Me. In one scene from the new movie, one of them appears reading a book, but there are two very funny details about this. The first is that this book is being read upside down. The second detail is that the book being held upside down is not just some generic book that does not even exist in real life. Actually, just like The Call of Cthulhu, it is another classic of literature called Moby Dick. Even before the movie truly begins, very interesting references are already happening, one of them appearing in the black and white video video where a train is passing by. It turns out this is the first film in history to be publicly shown to an audience, called Arrival of a Train at La Ciotat, and it was released in 1896. Since people back then were not used to movies, they got scared when the train moved toward the screen because they thought the train was real and that it was going to come out of the movie screen. And it seems that, in the Despicable Me universe, the Minions were present during the filming of this movie. Another scene taken from a classic that we see right at the beginning is the one where the moon appears, but with a face and a rocket stuck in one of its eyes. This is part of A Trip to the Moon, a French silent film created by Georges Méliès and released in 1902. That's right, the Minions' solo adventures are basically history lessons at this point, and we have even more references like this throughout the production. When the Minions are chasing a criminal because they feel like working for him, the little monsters cause total chaos around the city, and in the middle of that chaos, they make the wall of a house fall on top of a man who only survives because he was in the perfect position to go through a window. This is an imitation of a scene from Steamboat Bill Jr., a Buster Keaton comedy released in 1928. Since this was before special effects became as good as they are today, the wall of a real house was actually knocked down toward actor Buster Keaton. He could have been seriously injured if he had not been standing in the exact right spot. At one point, director Max's car appears, and we get the pleasure of seeing his license plate. This is a pleasure because license plates in movies almost always have some spectacular detail, and that is the case here. The plate code is OFP-857, exactly the same plate code as Herbie, a Volkswagen Beetle that comes to life in The Love Bug, a 1968 Disney feature film. Illumination is not messing around when it comes to making Easter eggs about things that the kids watching their movies are way too young to understand. Before the Minions became movie stars, it was shown that they spent a long time searching for a new master in several different societies. One of the places they seemed to have visited was the Mayan Empire, one of the most advanced societies that existed in the past on the American continent. However, it seems the Minions were completely alone when they passed through that place and failed to find a leader there, indicating that the Mayan Empire had already come to an end when the little monsters passed by. But maybe they had already gone on adventures there in the past. Who knows?
Ever thought about always having new animation content on your feed? Just subscribe and hit the bell.
One of the things that makes Minions and Monsters an incredible movie is the way it makes jokes that only adults and people who understand history can really understand. There is a moment where police officers are pouring drinks into the sewer. Anyone who does not know how the United States worked around the mid-1920s probably did not understand anything about this scene, but anyone with more knowledge about this subject will have noticed that they are throwing away alcoholic drinks, because alcoholic beverages were not allowed in the United States during that time. In that same scene, we see another historical fact being referenced when several women walk by holding signs that say, "Votes for Women." This is a protest made with the goal of allowing women to have the right to vote. Unfortunately, it was illegal for women to vote in the United States and in many other countries at that time, something that changed over time through movements that fought for women's rights. It is really cool that Minions and Monsters includes these little moments that remind us that the world has improved a lot since then. The Minions take a little while to put on their amazing overalls, but it was obvious that this needed to happen sooner or later. The curious thing is that this time, they got their overalls from a luxury store. In other words, these very simple pieces of clothing must cost a lot of money. Well, that actually makes sense because these clothes need to be very resistant to be worn by the Minions, who are always getting themselves into all kinds of dangerous adventures. When the Minions become a worldwide success, they get several products like toys and plushies. Yes, just like what happened in real life after the success of Despicable Me. We also see a Minion-themed sign where the word books is written. So that means there are books about the Minions in this universe. Were the books written by them or by writers hired to write adventures about the Minions? Well, considering James is such an amazing artist, it is easy to believe that he wrote these books. Ed was a really cool addition to the Minions cast, especially because he has hearing problems and needs to communicate through signs, which adds some very nice inclusion to the franchise. By the way, his introduction also has an Easter egg. After being covered by debris, his hand suddenly rose up, just like what happens in several horror movies. All these Easter eggs are incredible, but the best part is its ending, mainly because in another video about Minions and Monsters, we figured out what was going to happen before the movie was even released. This whole adventure may have been incredible, but in the end, it was revealed that this entire story was just a movie directed by the Minions, with all the characters like the Cyclops, director Max and Gooby being only actors. This is the biggest plot twist in the entire Despicable Me franchise, but we managed to figure it out before Minions and Monsters even hit theaters. So now you know. If you want to discover everything about your favorite movies, you already know who to count on.
Take the chance and watch the 2 videos we left on the screen. I'm sure you'll have fun. See you soon.